and welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about pre-registration and registered reports, what they are, how to do them, and why you might want to implement these in your research. So I'm going to get started by talking a little bit about pre-registration and registered reports and why they are useful tools for us. So we know that biases are inherent throughout the scientific process, and pre-registration and registered reports are two tools that can help to reduce bias and increase rigor and reproducibility in our research. So I'm going to do a little bit of a distinction here, and then I'll talk about it again in a couple of slides. But pre-registration and registered reports are very similar in a lot of ways. And then there are a couple of minor differences in the implementation of them. So a pre-registration is essentially a guide map that you would say at the beginning of your study. You lay out everything that you're doing, talk about these are the methods that I am going to do, here are the analyses that I'm going to use, here's how much power my study has, here are the types of samples that I'm going to recruit, and you lay out all of this out in a pre-written plan. And then you can pre-register that plan and timestamp it up on a platform like OSF or in another way, and say, here's my plan, this is what I'm going to do, and this is the study that I'm going to run. I'm going to timestamp it, and then I'm going to start my study. And pre-registration will help us to reduce p-hacking and maybe post-hoc hypothesis revision. So this idea that if you have pre-registered and said, this is the analysis plan that I'm going to implement, then you're less likely to go back after the study is done and say, oh, you know what, I'm actually going to do this analysis instead, because it is pre-registered and stated that you have your analytic plan. You're less likely to deviate from that plan or kind of more softly change it along the way. And so this gives some protection from that p-hacking, saying, oh, I'm actually going to exclude these samples, and that's how I found this effect, and things like that can be a barrier to rigorous research and research that's reproducible. Registered reports are a formal submission of a pre-registration to a journal, and registered reports are actually peer-reviewed. So before you would start a study, in order to do a registered report, you would do your pre-registration, go ahead and stamp that, and then submit a registered report, which is very similar to that pre-registration. Maybe you have a few more in the introduction, a few more things to set up the paper. But it is essentially the introduction, the method section, and maybe an analytic plan for a paper that you would want to write once the study is complete. And so you would submit that registered report to a journal. If the journal liked it, they would come back. Some peer reviewers would say, hey, we actually think you should maybe do this or change this. You would revise your registered report and potentially revise your pre-registration just to reflect that those are the same. And then once that registered report is accepted to the journal, then you can count that as a journal publication. So that is a journal publication. And if in the future you want to submit the results of that study, that journal is essentially giving you a guarantee that as long as you are using the methods that you stated that you would use in your registered report, and that you are doing this with fidelity, that they will accept the paper regardless of the actual findings. So you might have null findings, and you might not find anything in your study, but the journal is still going to accept that stage 2 registered report because they are essentially pledging that they will they will accept it, given that given the prior that you are running the study that you said that you would actually run. And in an ideal world, both of these would be completed before study initiation and recruitment. We can talk about how that is really difficult sometimes, and it's not feasible to do a registered report and wait around for several rounds of peer review when you have a study that needs to get implemented. But pre-registration, it has doesn't have that peer review process baked in, and so it is something that I think is fairly accessible and is an ideal way to protect yourself from this post-hoc hypothesis revision or PHACing, to state what your methods are ahead of time, increase the rigor and reproducibility of your research, and to also make it more likely that a journal will eventually accept your paper, because you can say, hey, I pre-registered this and I'm doing what I had intended back 2 years ago when I started this study. Pre-registration and registered reports that were initially kind of designed with the new research in mind, where you're doing primary data collection. However, you can also do both pre-registration and registered reports for secondary data analysis. I have rarely seen a registered report for secondary data analysis, but certainly pre-registration, and that is what we're going to be practicing in our class this week. So I showed this slide a few weeks ago at the beginning of class and talked about how there's kind of 3 levels of what I consider to be open science skills. So we have our beginner open science skills, our intermediate open science skills, and our advanced open science skills. Things like posting preprints and publishing open access in journals, you can kind of figure out how to do that in under an hour for most people. And I would consider those to be, although the most ubiquitous open science practices, to be the most approachable and to also kind of have beginner level skills needed in order to do that. You may need money to publish open access, but it's not necessarily going to require a separate set of skills. When we're talking about pre-registration and registered reports, I see these as being in that intermediate step of an intermediate skill set. These are skills that you likely have and have developed from different parts of your training, and a pre-registration or doing a registered report is a lot of just kind of pulling those together. So it is taking, you might have to brush up or increase skills in a couple of key areas like power analysis, or if you are maybe going towards the more advanced side, creating synthetic data to practice or show your analytic plan on. But in terms of actually saying, okay, this is the study that I'm going to run, and here are my methods, this is often very similar to what you might already be doing in a grant or a protocol for the IRB. It is just a lot more detailed, and a lot more detailed specifically in the analytics setup. So we will, again, practice this as we go forward in the class over the next couple of weeks, and move towards really feeling solid in this set of skills. I talked about this on the previous slides, but just to reiterate, so preprints, pre-registrations, and registered reports are 3 terms that you are going to hear quite a bit when we're thinking about open science and rigor and reproducibility, and how to practice those, and what the tools are that we have for those. And this table just kind of puts in one place what are the similarities and differences across these three terms and what they mean. So both preprints and pre-registrations are not peer-reviewed, although people can comment on them, whereas a registered report would be a peer-reviewed document. Preprints and pre-registrations are self-published on open access repositories, whereas a registered report is published in a scientific journal. And a difference between preprints and pre-registrations is preprints are done at the publication phase. So after, so when you are, maybe you've done the study, you've written it up, you're saying, okay, this is an article that I'm going to publish, then you can release it as a preprint. So you don't necessarily need to pre-specify your analyses in order to do that preprint. You can preprint, you can have a registered report, for instance, be a preprint and a registered report. But that's a difference between preprints and pre-registrations, where pre-registrations, the main point of that is to pre-specify what you're going to be doing in the trial as well as your analysis. Of note, pre-registrations vary widely in how much people will include in their pre-registration and what kind of details they will go into methodologically. Preprints and pre-registrations are, they're often both time-stamped. Both can be updated, but one of the major points of the pre-registration is that it does say, okay, I'm going to timestamp it at this time on March 22nd, 2023, and I'm saying right now at this date, time and date, this is the study that I'm going to do, and these are the analyses that I'm going to do, and it has kind of that timestamp allows for you to say, I did indeed plan to do this months or years in advance before I started the study. And a registered report, again, it should be accepted before studies or analysis begins. Preprints are often kind of updated throughout the publication process. So it might be a first draft is published as a preprint, and then after it goes to a journal and there's some updates, then it might be updated later. The main point or the impetus behind preprints is often a swift dissemination of results and having that citation, as well as a wide dissemination of results. For pre-registrations, this is often seen as favorable for future papers to have a pre-registration, and some journals even require a pre-registration. And registered reports, on the other hand, are that conditional guarantee of acceptance. So when we're talking about biases in the literature, pre-registrations and registered reports might help to reduce bias of p-hacking and that post-trial kind of like revision of a hypotheses, whereas registered reports are helping with another reproducibility problem in the literature, and that is the file drawer effect and the fact that null results are less likely to actually be published. So because the registered reports say we will publish this no matter what we find, it should, in theory, reduce that bias that might happen otherwise, where null effects are less likely to get published, and then effect sizes are are artificially inflated in the available literature versus what's actually been done. Okay, so the last thing I'll say on this before we go into a little bit of a demo is that preprints in particular, but all three of these modes have seen a rise in the past 10 years. And you could see particularly with preprints in the past 5 years even, there's been a huge surge in the number of preprints, and largely because that is, again, that accessible way to practice open science and kind of can be a first door and a first step in for a lot of people to practicing open science and increasing the rigor and reproducibility of their research. But more than that, in terms of preprints, it's about increasing access. All right. So I'm going to stop here, switch over to another video, and we'll do a little demo on OSF of a pre-registration.